Afternoon, everyone. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's welcome to you, and it's wonderful to see you all. I think the 5 days have been tremendous, incredible stuff which has happened. A huge number of speakers, probably 35 to 40 speakers, leaders from industry, from different parts of the country, power pack sessions, one-to-one meetings. Even I was part of a few of them, and really touching every dimension of risk which was there. And today risk comes in many forms, not just what we talk about in typically is a compliance risk or a regulatory risk. But as we know, there's a geopolitical risk, there is an ESG or a climate risk which is there, and then there is a human risk which could be there. There is even a risk coming out from even AI as we go into agentic AI and AI, and we are talking about that in terms of responsible AI. So I think so. Those conversations have been very valuable to everyone, at least to me, when I have attended those sessions. And the other big piece around risk today is that it's not just unidimensional. There is, you have an event which takes place. It's not only a financial risk, but it could be a reputation risk, for example. There could be a disruption risk, which will impact your supply chains and so on and so forth. So that was the other part which I think so people really appreciated. And resulting from that, I think so very clearly a board agenda. My takeaway from all this has been that we should establish, if we already not have, is to an office of chief risk officer. I think so. The banks and financial institutions have been doing that for a number of years, and what has happened thereafter is that a conversation, even a business transformation, is not complete unless or until the risk elements are factored in, risk and regulatory elements. And I think so that's something which any and every organization should be doing, depending on the size and the nature of work it is in. To culminate this, what we did, we put a lot of the insights which came through in a GT Risk Playbook, a kind of a guide or a cheat sheet book, for want of a better word, wherein a lot of actionables came about. And I think so. It's a good time to release that. And for that, I would like to call Vishesh, our CEO, to do the honors.
Thank you very much, Dipankar, Gagan, everybody else. Thank you for joining. This sort of thing isn't worth it without all of you making time to be here. Just three or four things for me. I started my day today watching the 2013 presentation I made to our global partners. We had folks from 120 countries with us in 2013. And I just looking at that presentation, the client names I talked about at that time, uh, and some of the names really stood out for me from their Ranbaxy Laboratories, Amira Foods, Eros Multimedia, Network 18, and of course several other clients. But I'm just seeing how many of those names are either not there today or there in a very different way compared to where those organizations are today. And that sort of reminded me of what I always say, that India is on this vertical climb from 350 billion as an economy to sort of 3.5 trillion today, in that 25 years, to sometime in 2047, 2050, 10x once again, 3.5 to 35 trillion. So that is going to be a vertical climb. And as I've always said, every vertical climb also comes with experiencing 5G forces, experiencing risks. So value is there to be created. Whether we end up preserving value or not over that period is a choice each one of us have to consider. What can we do about it? And I think that comes down to, in all our organizations today, including my organization, run Thornton Bharat, there are mines sitting in our organization. Are they just mines or are they potential nuclear weapons that'll destroy us? Is what we have to find. I know proactively, increasingly, our teams have been helping companies look at finding those things so that we can do so before a regulator comes to us and asks us to do, that sort of look in. And I think that is what I'm sure all of you are considering because once again, we are on this vertical climb. Value will be created, and it's in our hands to consider whether we want to preserve that value or not, so that you also don't become another name, a logo that somebody refers to 10 years out, and you're there in a very different shape and form for whatever reason. As Dipankar said, we're here to just unveil this playbook, which is not just a summary of this risk week, it is also a practical guide that captures some of these big regulatory shifts. It captures actionable frameworks for you all to consider applying. So, therefore, without further ado, I'd like to invite Gagan Preet Singh Puri, our crisis and resilience leader, crisis and resilience, as we call this offering now at GT Bharat, to do the honors and take this conversation forward. The link to this playbook is in the chat. If you'd like to download this and all the toolkits and everything else, have access to that. But eventually, feel free to reach out to Gagan and he'd be happy to walk you through it personally along with his teams also. Gagan, my compliments to you and once again to everybody who joined this because this is meaningless without all of you making time. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you so much, Vishesh. And as you always say, it's a constellation, and it's the team that's actually pulled together to put this week. And what a week it's been! Oh my God! I mean, I'm just kind of looking back at where we were last Sunday and where we are today. 20 plus sessions, 35 plus external speakers, and just hearing the conversation coming from each and everyone. And not only that, just my own, my GD partners and other subject matter professionals from the firm, and the quality of conversations that we've had. We've got podcasts, webinars, in-person events, master classes. I think I just pulling everything together, just the carrying the conversation from from one class to another. I think it was just for me, it was just personally exhilarating, and I'm just looking forward to kind of digesting this over the weekend. Just kind of just it actually makes some of us more take some time, step back actually, and think through all that we've managed to absorb. My two key takeaways our in-person session in Bangalore. I think what we discussed around situational awareness was just something exemplary. Right? The way in today's day and age, how you need to be aware of each and every sort of minute changes in the ecosystem and what it means. And from the Delhi session, I actually learned a new word, UDA, which I think is a US Department of Defense thing on observe, orient, decide, and act. I had never heard of that before. So it was just some great learning coming from there. So, with that, this is our concluding session. We've launched the playbook. We hope the playbook is going to be useful. Everyone, should take a look at it, and we're happy to drive conversations around it. But as we look at, some of us who've been involved in conceptualizing and in running some of these sessions, I invited a few of my colleagues here on this call today to just kind of get their reflection. And first, I would turn to Dinesh, who's probably sat through most of the sessions that we've had, sometimes as an observer, sometimes as a very active participant, and often as a person who would then drive some very key questions. And I think we saw that in Bangalore yesterday, where he, just in the middle of everything, we just had a spurt in a discussion that came out that just added a total different connotation to what we were doing. So Dinesh, you sat through these sessions, you reflected on it. And I'm sure as you networked, you spoke to people who attended both the webinars and the in-person sessions. What really do you think is the key in the risk landscape that Indian businesses should probably think about as immediate action? I know a lot of us are thinking about it, talking about it, but what would be those key action steps?
So, no, thanks, Gagan. And I completely resonate what you're saying and what Dipankar was saying. It's been a really exciting week. I think hearing the viewpoints of the board members yesterday, we had board members, we had KMPs, we had SMPs of various companies, and it was really phenomenal to hear them speak. One thing is very clear: risk will continue to change in today's VUCA world, right? So if we are taking the fact, and I think Vishesh lightly also spoke about it, that there are companies which were very big. Those companies exist in a different manner now. It's because they were not able to preempt what is the risk which they were dealing with. So, if I had to really talk about the three shifts in the risk landscape, I would say the first one is risk is no longer about compliance. It's a strategy or a strategic tool. It has to be built into how companies invest, grow, and transform. Boards, and this is something which we heard during the whole week, can no longer treat risk as a checklist. Boards need to be involved to help companies take strategic decisions, and the boards need to be able to predict disruptions before they happen. They can't come in later to explain what happened. The second is really about resilience, right? Resilience today is about being flexible and not fixed. And I think in the fixed old risk frameworks worked in a stable world. But in today's world, where at the same time you can be hit by geopolitics, you can be hit by climate events, you can be hit by cyber attacks, and you can be hit by new regulations, uh, you know, you need to be flexible, and you need to have flexible risk systems that let themselves change directions quickly, while at the same time not compromising on governance, because governance needs to be there. Finally, technology and governance have to work together. So we are seeing the emergence of AI. We're talking about data privacy, and we've spoken about it in the new DPDPA law. Now all of these are board issues, and they are no longer just IT issues. So as risk grows and regulators grow stricter, companies need to have a single joint up approach to technology controls, as well as people accountability, to build trust and stay competitive. So, if I had to really sum up, risk has to be built into strategy. Resilience means being flexible and to act quickly, and technology and governance must come together. I think this is what we put together in a summary in our playbook, and we are pretty confident that if CXOs and boards followed some of this stuff, they will be better placed to manage some of the shocks, and in the end be able to continue to gain the trust which they have from external stakeholders.
Yeah. Gagan, if I can add just one more
Please, of
thing from
course.
my side, I would say, if I look back again over that, you know, period from 2013 to now, what's the one big shift that's happened? This VUCA world and Bani world or whatever you call it. Yes, things have become more dynamic, but they were always dynamic. I think you always feel like things are, dynamic right now, more dynamic than they were yesterday. I'm not so sure. The global financial crisis, didn't that feel like, the world is going to come apart and nobody knew? And of course, the pandemic and, the time where India was categorized with the pigs and, all that in the middle of that decade. I think really the big shift has happened that we'd love for all of you to have a view on that and talk about that in your ecosystem is the shift from just compliance in form to compliance in form and substance. And I think that's going to keep shifting from here in the India of the next 20 years. That's what I recognize as a founder, as an owner, as a partner and leader of GT Bharat. And I think all of you also have to think about that. That is that realization there that today it isn't just about compliance in legal form, it is both form and substance. Over to you, Gaurav.
No, that's fair. That's fair. That's fair. And I'm going to just kind of take that conversation forward with Dipankar. Dipankar, two things for you. When we started, we had our opening round on Monday. We discussed a lot about the past, the present, the future. And I think, hearing what's happened this week and, just listening to people, I was curious on two things. One, what do you really believe is the single most important capabilities organizations must need to build? And secondly, did your view change at all during this week? Like what you thought on Monday and what you thought on Friday? Did something come up that kind of, made you think a little more about what we were discussing on Monday?
Yeah, I don't think so. It changed my view. On the contrary, it reaffirmed the view. right? And the around risk being a wholesome agenda rather than only very narrow compliance agenda. What did excite me a lot was quite very engaging conversation. And for the first time, I saw lawyers talk beyond their narrow area of a very legalese language. So that was the that was a change which happened in some ways. But yeah, if you look, I scanned around the room on Monday when I was there. They were corporate governance professionals, they were lawyer, legal fellows, they were risk guys, they were finance guys, there was a few business guys, right? And that's what kind of said, oh man, okay, interesting how the business guys are here to see, and the diversity in the type of organizations they represented. So really, yeah, I think so. So which gave me the confidence that I think so organizations are by and large on the right path in terms of treating this topic far more seriously.
Thanks for that, Dipankar. Yeah, absolutely. I think we saw that consistently across most of our in-person sessions also. A lot of more business guys coming in, which I think is quite an interesting shift. Jasprit, I want to jump to you. As we were thinking about starting Risk Week, and in true nature of everything that keeps changing, suddenly DPDP rules came out. So we had to, make last minute adaptations, even our own schedule, to kind of say that, okay, now we got to talk about this because it's there. And that is, something that's it's very kind of consistent with the way we see our world, constant change coming in. But more from the cyber world, we've obviously, invested a lot in cyber capabilities, helping our clients navigate some very tough situations around cyber, and hoping that many of them don't get into a tough situation. But what is your sort of take now after, being in sessions, also, hearing many of our clients and in terms of their journeys on what should they really be prioritizing and thinking specifically when it comes out to cyber? Again, that's a big part covered in our paper also that we've report that
Right.
we've launched today. What would be your key takeaways from that?
Thanks, Gagan. Uh, best thing, first thing that you go and talk to CXOs about is they don't want to wake up in the morning, see their names in the newspaper because of a cyber breach, right? That's how important cyber breach has become. And as you rightly said, last 7 days from a DPDPA perspective, uh, we never had a data privacy law to now having a full-fledged data privacy law with clear-cut timelines for implementation and compliance. Uh, One of the foremost things that everybody lacks is going back to the basics, right? Ask any CIO, CISO, or any technology head in the country today, do they understand the entire lay of land of where does data travel in your organization? A lot of people will say yes, but that is structured data, which is present in databases. What about data flowing around in emails, data flowing around in Excel files? That's one, right? Second, there are very strict guidelines around the entire incident reporting piece. The 72 hours incident reporting piece from a DPDPA perspective, 6 hours from a certain perspective. So not only do you have to understand that you've been hit, you have to do a root cause analysis and then also report. And then there's a question of what do you report, what's an incident versus what's a data breach going on. So that's where we have a SOC, which we run 24/7, where we actually monitor clients' networks 24/7 to tell them whether they've been breached and proactively help them do all of this. Once you've come out of the entire data discovery or the phase around the entire compliance monitoring is how do you report an incident? Speed and clarity today are the biggest keys that will help you comply to this and then monitor this on an ongoing basis. And last but not the least is how do you build in, right? Uh, you spoke about AI risk. Dipankar spoke about AI risk. Technology will change more so every 18 months, right? So cyber resilience is not only about technology. It's about being proactive. It's about having awareness sessions, and it's also about accountability within the organization, because the boards are now asking organizations to become accountable on cyber risks. Thank you. Back to you.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Jaspreet. I think well said. I'm going to jump to Naveen now. Naveen, I heard a very interesting comment from one of the participants in one of the sessions, I think, and it was like an example of the most aggressive form of growth is cancer. And so you shouldn't grow in a way that it become cancerous. You should grow in a way that's sustainable and actually adding value to a body, not taking away from it. That really struck a chord with me, and I'm sure in the sessions you participated, you also heard really balancing risk with risk mitigation and growth has clearly been a key theme that's come out of most of the discussions there. What is your take on the frameworks, on the practices, and what should organizations be thinking about, and what are your key takeaways from this aspect?
No, thanks again. Very valid question. If I have to put it very simply, how do we really move from hindsight to foresight? You know, we'll have to really stop looking in the rear view mirror and start anticipating what's ahead. Frankly, the risk management process has to work in a way now that you align with the business, you align with the strategy of the company, and make sure that the strategy is protected from a long-term value creation as well. Now, you know, while if I look at strategy, you cannot be throwing yourself thin in this entire process. Within the strategy, you will have to actually identify which are the material risk, which can impact your strategic objectives. And that is where, this entire risk management process will become a growth enabler, not a blocker for the growth kind of a stuff. Let me just take a very simple example. Jasprit just said, DPDPA. Now, if digital transformation is just core to your strategy, can you really stay away from DPDP or cyber resilience? It's actually foundation for your growth itself. And now somewhere the whole thought has to be that identify the key strategic risk, identify what can go wrong with those strategic risks, and start monitoring them on a regular basis rather than doing a postmortem of those. And if I look at it, you know, data is the new oil now. How can you really use data from a future growth perspective? How can you do scenario planning to plan for disruptions before they actually hit you? That's actually that foresight is not just protecting value, it is actually creating value for the leadership as well. So how do you really use analytics, artificial intelligence to create more value for the organization? And one of the key things that I've just realized that, as a part of the process, why can't we just automate the routine controls? Because every hour spent on manual compliance checks is not an hour spent on innovation. It's actually doing a routine mundane task. And for me, automation isn't just about efficiency. For me, it's oxygen for strategic thinking. It allows the risk management team to focus more on high-end order questions rather than looking at routine tasks. So how really want to process from an automation perspective is something that really needs to focus on. And one key thing that I actually got from the panelists was, how do you really move internal audit from assurance to intelligence? Traditionally, we have always been an assurance function. Now the board really wants, or the CFO, CEOs really want, that internal audit has to be an intelligence function. How it can challenge, assumptions, for example, behind a merger and acquisition or something on digital transformation, and make sure that the right kind of alerts are forwarded to the management to make sure that whatever strategy that was defined by the organization is on the right track from a growth perspective. And again, if I have to summarize, the whole mindset needs to change, from being reactive to proactive, from being just giving assurance to giving intelligent inputs to the CFO and the CEO and the board as well.
Well, thanks, Naveen. That's very well summarized. I am going to jump to Vivek. And Vivek, not only in this week, you've been, running a number of conversations in the financial services space. And clearly, we've seen unprecedented, sort of regulatory complexity, disruption caused by digital, third-party dependencies in the ecosystem. And there's so much going on in this space. And really, I guess one of the key themes for us was to look at what do institutions need to do to go beyond compliance. How do they really strengthen what's coming up? And I'm sure you've had very candid discussions, very detailed discussions. Some of it has also come out in a white paper. But really, what are the themes you think are the ones most pertinent, the most important key takeaways from everything that we've heard around this?
So, in fact, one of the biggest things that came out as a conversation was how uh, trust is actually a big competitive advantage as a part of business, and that's really how where organizations are actually looking at risk. And that was a big change that we actually in terms of that was a key theme that came out in terms of how trust is at the center of everything. And the second theme is empowered governance functions. I was very surprised to actually sense different governance players talking about tech investments, something that's not happened in the past. I mean, there was a lot of focus on investing in technology from a front end business standpoint, but purely governance, risk, compliance systems, talking about tech investments in that space was something that was refreshing. So that was the second great theme that came out. And the third piece that essentially in terms of came out was this really big piece on how exactly the GRC professionals are actually having a voice at the board. So, and how it is influencing business decisions and they are a part of the table. So I think these three parts were something that, came out as a conversation as a part of all interactions, while, there were many aspects that came out, but, if I have to put it across themes, I think these were the 3 points that came out.
Very pertinent ones, and I know we had some very spirited discussions with a few of our clients on this. And Rohit, that kind of brings me to you and a question to you. I think one of the things we promised at the start of the week was there's going to be some important practical insights that we will come out at the end of it, and it's not just going to be 35,000 feet, but something very practical. And I think one of the things we discussed in some of our webinars and in our discussions was having a comprehensive cyber checklist or a sort of a checklist. And that too from not just, that, we are complying with the law, but really from a resilience and from a regulatory sort of readiness perspective, not just as a tick in the box perspective. What were your key takeaways, or what, do you think are some of the inputs that we've got to really make this a sound and a robust sort of a way to look at things?
So,
Sure.
That's actually for Rohit, Vivek. And you can weigh in on that too, but
Vivek, you may
let,
feel free to
let
come
Rohit
in
start.
anytime.
But if you want to go first, you can do that too.
no, so in fact, Rohit, you come in on that one, but just to in terms of interestingly say, tech resilience has been a really big piece, and the work that we actually did at one of the leading private sector banks was an example of that. Uh, Rohit is the right expert to kind of get into the details of it. So over to you, Rohit.
No, thanks, Vivek, and thanks, Gagan, for the question. So basically, from a cyber compliance perspective, in the current times, and though we are not talking purely compliance per se, but it's more to do with how do you really drive the requirements or mandates via framework sort of a driven approach, right? Most of the times, organization, depending on the sector that they fall into, let's say they are a bank, NBFC, or for that matter, some fund house for that matter, right? So and with exposure in towards an intermediary or a depository, they would have multiple regulations sort of coming into their purview, which includes an RBI master direction, could be a SEBI requirement, it could be a UIDI, and now, of course, all of us are talking about DPDPA, right? So multiple regulations sort of come into play, and in such a situation, how do you really balance? How do you ensure that you comply to all the mandates, but at the same time you have a framework which gives you a complete 360-degree perspective of where you stand vis-a-vis the compliances, and it is also sort of not boiling the ocean also, right? So in the sense that you're not creating audit fatigue for that matter. It's helping you to sort of drive efficiencies while you're ensuring compliances. So most of the organizations are currently doing something which commonly is referred as a unified compliance framework, where you sort of mix and match. You try to do a one single sort of approach where you map all the requirements into one single umbrella, and then eventually you drive the compliance. Some of the common elements which we've seen in the unified compliance frameworks revolves around the overall technology governance, which Vivek just talked about. Dipankar, Vishesh, Jasprit also talked about the AI related risks, right? We are commonly seeing a lot of AI risks controls being added to your control checklist. Data privacy protection, DPDPA, incident response, business continuity planning, tech risk controls, third party risk controls, identity management, etc. And then, of course, last but not the least, as all of us know, for any organization, security or cyber is as strong as your weakest link, right? And in any organization, the weakest link are the employees. How do you really train or make the employees more aware? How do you drive campaigns and so on and so forth, right? So I think all of these are some of the large mandates or control which sort of is driven in the framework. And what we see is that the organization should also build a culture where they test these controls on a regular basis, and at the same time they are driving not just compliance on paper, but also they are ensuring that it is really compliance in spirit. Back to you, Gagan.
Well, thank you. I think that's a interesting perspective, and I only hope that organizations take some of these things into consideration as they build up for the future. Naveen, which brings me to a question to you. And as consultants, we are often faced with the fact that, oh yeah, you guys are a cost, and I don't know whether one can really put a cost on compliance. You can have a cost of compliance, but I don't know if you can put a cost on compliance. And there's always a divergence in my mind when we talk about that. But really, the discussion in a lot of forums, including our Risk Week, has been on it as a value driver. And is there a value trade-off that one can get on that? And I was curious to hear your perspective on it, and what do you think? What really is driving the discussion for it?
So I think, Gagan, if I look at it, I think I agree. A lot of people view risk optimization as a cost, but that's actually in the current world, it's a very narrow view. The real opportunity is to move from compliance driven to being resilient, from ticking in the boxes to actually help organization build system that can thrive under stress. The way Vishesh said, we are moving from a US dollar 3.5 trillion to a 35 trillion economy. You know, are the processes really able to put up with that kind of growth? If I look at it, currently, if your organization follows just a compliance model, it will just answer a question that are we safe today? But if the organization actually changes to a resilience model, you know, it can actually answer that can we grow tomorrow in a much more effective manner? That's fundamentally the difference that the organizations have to build in, and the risk optimization teams have to build in, not be just a concerns keeper. You have to be a kind of a lever for the management from a growth perspective as well. And I think one of the key things, how will we actually make that difference, is actually, are you really aligning your entire risk optimization strategy or risk management strategy with the actual strategy of the company? For instance, if you're evaluating whether to enter a new geography or something on regulatory volatility, how the risk optimization teams are actually helping you to evaluate that, rather than you have entered a geography and the team just comes in to evaluate how your successful has been. That's where the risk process will act as a growth lever and not as a compliance keeper. And also, you know how really effectively, the way everyone said, how can we really use data analytics to predict the future, to help the organization to be more stable in the future? That is something that would really help to make sure that you really move from a cost model to a growth model. And then one of the key things that we really can't ignore is how the culture in the organization has been made. A culture of risk awareness reframes actually risk as a driver of informed decision making, not a barrier to growth kind of a stuff. And when leaders and employees actually embrace this mindset of risk, agility becomes possible, and actually risk actually moves from a kind of a defensive mechanism to a strategic asset. So I think if I have to just summarize how you really bring impact to the strategy of the company, how you really give, forward-looking data to the management using data analytics, how you really add value from a strategic perspective in terms of mergers and acquisition, digital transformation, and really the one of the key things is how are you keeping a tab on the culture of the organization itself. Typically all risk optimizations, we usually look at process controls and don't look at the culture part of it. Now that is something really critical that you really need to focus on from a growth perspective as well. So I think if you're able to combine all this, I think no one would actually call you as a cost center. You really are seen as a growth lever.
No, no, and that's very true. And we realize over a period of time, things change and things don't change. And just as you were speaking, I was reflecting on one of Dipankar's slide from 2000, and I still remember it. It had a slide which had boxes to it. It said cost of a problem, cost to solve the problem was more than the cost of the problem. Then cost to ensure there's no recurrence, cost to change the culture. So actually, when the problem was so much, you realize at the end of the day it was 5x or 10x. And Dipankar, I was just reflecting, so much changed and so much still hasn't changed. Still
Yeah.
28 years later, that slide is still as relevant in 2020, 2025 as it was in 2020. So in 25 years, things are there. But yeah, it's pretty interesting to look at it from that perspective. And I'm going to jump to Vivek. Vivek, uh, it's really in this way of partnerships and I do a lot of work with startups also. A key thing, always is like, we are a startup, we don't need structure, it will stifle innovation, it will stifle growth. And then you move to, regulated entities, which are again trying to expand, trying to grow. And the same thing comes, well, we are innovative, we are a digital first company. We may be in a regulated space, but, we've got to grow. And all this, what you're trying to put in terms of compliance, culture, and all is going to stifle innovation. People are going to be boxed into thinking. And I was at a client today, and I'm just kind of link it before I come to my question. And when my client bought this company, the company had audacity as one of its core values. And when my client invested in that company, and they're a Midwestern American corporation, which had a very different thing. They could not believe that they were buying a company that had audacity as a core value. So they changed it to audacity with integrity. So, yes, we wanted to innovate, we wanted to have the leverage to work, but at the same time, sorry, but you got to have a solid culture of compliance. And I credit them and I respect them for it. But what really do you think is the priority where one should put, or is there a priority or a balance that one needs to bring when one talks about innovation versus compliance or innovation versus growth, and innovations versus structure?
So, so one of the things, and this is interestingly in terms of what is commonly said, is innovation is usually at the edge of regulation, and it doesn't need to be. Honestly, in terms of innovation, can be with regulation, and you don't really need to find regulatory areas, because I believe that there is this whole sandbox environment that the regulators have also provided. And the more the startup ecosystem kind of works closely with the regulator and uses these frameworks, I believe that they will be able to be far more successful. So I think it's innovation and regulation, and I believe that changes are happening where uh, basically from an innovation perspective, things should become easier. The sandbox is an example of that, and many innovations technically come out of that. The whole central bank backed digital currency, the CBDC, which is basically a legal tender that they want to use the sandbox environment for, is an example of that. But I believe that many more use cases that and problem statements that people solve, I think that will kind of help. So I at least believe that it's innovation and regulation, never at the edge or around or.
No, either one. So that's a good play. With that, I'm going to ask both Dipankar and Dinesh a concluding question. And Dinesh, I'll go with you first. We've unveiled the GT Risk Playbook. Firstly, thank you to Dipankar and to you, both you and Dipankar for your inputs on it. And what is your one message to board CXOs, any reader of that playbook to really on why this matters to them and why this should matter to them?
No, and I think very relevant, Gagan, for me, the playbook is not a report, it's a practical guide, right? I think it brings together everything we have discussed during the past week into very simple, usable tools which boards can use and CXOs can use. We've discussed about, how risk is no longer about ticking compliance boxes. It's about looking ahead. It's about problem solving early. It's about using risk actually not as a deterrence, but to make better growth, well-informed decisions. So I think I'm pretty confident that if KMPs, SMPs, boards, or anybody who uses this playbook, it'll just help them get the necessary guidance, which will help them take, better decisions, increase the trust of their organization with external stakeholders, and hopefully continue to grow in a sustainable manner.
Thank you, Vish. And Dipankar, I'm going to turn to you. You had a great perspective. We had some very spirited discussion, and frankly, you're also one who's challenged all of us at some measure on rethinking the future of risk as we go around, helping our clients look at risk in their business. What's the one key message from your side that you'd like to leave everyone with?
Yeah, so one key message is quite simple. It's a business issue, not a compliance issue. So what do I mean by that? I like to take the analogy of a Formula One race car on a Formula One racetrack, right? Now, if you really think about that, what's the objective? Objective is to go as fast as you can around the racetrack. What allows a Formula One driver to do that? It allows a Formula One driver to do that is the utmost confidence that there is a team out there who is given him or her car, which is perfect. Its brakes are running absolutely well. The car will stop the way it wants it. They won't slow down, so there are brakes there. Even if the brakes are not there, then there are guardrails in terms of various other mechanisms. The idea, because there is this confidence, and that's where I'm bringing a bit of an ecosystem play, which is risks managed by the organization themselves or the larger regulatory environment around you. The regulatory environment around you is all those guardrails, the tires, the safety cars. That's what. So an organization can look at that regulatory ecosystem in a way, no, that's there to support me to drive faster and safer and better. Or it can look at saying that, oh, bloody hell, this is a roadblock. I'm going to go straight through. Guess what's going to happen when you're going to go straight through? You will crash, right? So I think so. That's the one message that uh, effective risk management allows you to grow faster. And we have seen that in organizations upon organizations, right? So, and the second piece is that when you do this well, it builds trust with the stakeholders. It impacts the market value of the organization, perhaps not in the short term, but positively in the long term, 100%. You can look at it.
Thank you so much, Dipankar. And with that, I'd like to formally close GT India's Risk Week 2025. It's been a wonderful week. I want to especially thank, firstly, all my GT colleagues who've, worked relentlessly in putting together a great agenda. I think every discussion had some key takeaway. Something came out of it. It's all in our playbook that we put out. So special thanks to all of you. A special thanks to our client and markets team for being a rock solid pillar of support. Doing 20 plus sessions in a week, it was something I can say I was nervous about doing, but it's just, it's as they always say, it takes a village. So we have a great village at GT. All of us worked really, really. My compliments to each and every one of you, and to our clients who took the time to attend, our panelists, all 35 plus of them, who really spared the time, and not just the time, but the time they invested in preparing for the topics and coming and making sure every conversation, people could take away something from that. So with a really a token of gratitude to all of you, it's already got me thinking about GT India Risk Week 2026, and I can assure you it's going to be bigger, better, more detailed. We're going to, throw some more spins onto it. I think we've all tasted a little bit of blood on this one. And thanks to all of you also. I've had so many reach outs on LinkedIn, on email, saying how they have been a part of it and would like to be a part of it in the future. We will truly work on all your suggestions and making this more meaningful for everyone. Thanks a lot and have a great weekend and see you all soon. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.